Philly Foodworks is an online farmers market where you can shop a diverse variety of fresh, local produce, as well as local meats, dairy products, baked goods, and pantry items, all delivered right to your door. Supporting Philly Foodworks means not only eating healthier, but also contributing to our local sustainable economy. An impressive 90% of every dollar spent stays within the Philadelphia region. Visit phillyfoodworks.com and use the code CITYCAST to receive 20% off your first 3 orders. Plus, enjoy a free pound of strawberries. That's phillyfoodworks.com. The Pennsylvania primary is next Tuesday, May 19th, which means registered Democrats and Republicans will vote for candidates they want representing them in the general election later this year in November. It's a big deal. You'll see the candidates vying for the open seat in the 3rd Congressional District, since Congressman Dwight Evans is retiring. Plus other local races that you've probably heard nothing about until now. Our political contributor, Lauren Vitas, joins me to talk all about it. It's Wednesday, May 13th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and here's your last-minute voter's guide. Okay, Lauren, we're going to talk about the congressional race in just a minute. So I wanted to actually start with a race that I knew nothing about. Actually, none of our team here at CityCast Philly knew anything about this. This is a race that actually takes up most of the space on our ballots. I went to vote.phila.gov. I looked at a sample ballot from my neighborhood, and there's a bunch of names at the top right running for Democratic or Republican state committees. What is this race, and who are these people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure you are not going to be alone at being surprised about all these names on the ballot that you never heard of before. So these races happen typically during gubernatorial election year. So anytime the governor is up for election, you'll see the state committees elect their state committee people. Now, there's a Republican state committee and then there's a Democratic state committee. Folks Philly are probably like used to hearing about city committee and like the ward leaders and their local committee people. Mm-hmm. And this is basically just like a statewide version of that, right? So it's very similar in terms of sort of role and duty in terms of, state committee will endorse statewide candidates. They will set statewide policy platforms for the party. So, for example, most recently, the Democratic State Committee passed a resolution condemning the weaponization of ICE, sort of setting the tone of the party platform. And the way that state committee representatives are elected, it's each county has their own local elections, and the counties that have the higher population have more state committee members. So it's sort of proportional based on population. And state committee, depending on the number of seats in the county, they are split equally between men and women to try to have some gender parity there.
Yeah, I saw that. Mm-hmm.
And so when you step into the booth, you'll see a certain number of names that you need to vote for. And a lot of these names are probably going to be unfamiliar because state committee is I don't want to call it obscure because if you work in politics, you know what it is, but it's not something that most residents like deal with or have any interaction with on a day-to-day basis. You'll see a lot of elected officials running for state committee. You'll see some ward leaders running for state. You'll see folks that you'll recognize a couple of those names if you follow politics closely. But in many cases, it's just your neighbors who are interested in the position.
And basically what you're saying is they sort of set the maybe political agenda of what the party is going to care about.
Yeah, it's endorsements is really the sort of biggest piece of it, because when state committee endorses a candidate, that usually means financial support will follow. because, state committee, as I said, it's broken down into congressional districts. That's a lot of ground to cover. So unlike, your local committee person with city committee who might be knocking on doors for elections and things like that, state committee people aren't as boots on the ground as city committee folks. But
Okay.
where they're important is the endorsements and the resources and just serving as like a validator in terms of just sort of like institutional political support.
How are you supposed to vote on these people if we don't really know who they are?
That is a really great question.
It's kind of like vote when we vote for like judges.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to judge the judge?
So the Bar Association puts down recommendations, right? So they have a process where they vet folks and they look at these judges, their records as lawyers, and they talk to people and they say recommended or not recommended.
Right.
We don't have anything very similar with state committee. I would say though that the good news about this is that the state committee, their roles and responsibilities are a lot less important than judges. So there's not much harm you can do in terms of voting for folks on state committee. As I said, it's an internal party role. It's not an elected public position. And so I vote for the folks who I recognize their name, and you don't have to use all your votes. You can just vote for the people you know. If you want, you can Google folks ahead of time. It's I guess what I'm saying is that there's not going to be dire consequences if you pick wrong.
Okay, let's go back to the most high profile race in this election, the primary in the 3rd Congressional District to represent about half of the city in Congress. This person will represent Philly and DC. We've done a couple of shows digging into the race and the controversies and the differences between the frontrunners. We'll put those links in today's show notes. Because there aren't any Republican candidates on the ballot, it's going to be a Democrat. We're in the final days of this campaign. What are you seeing? What are you noticing in these final days?
I think you're starting to see the gloves come off a little bit. Folks realize that we're less than a week out from the election. So you've seen some recent vocal attacks on Representative Chris Rabb's voting record. It's starting to get heated in a way that I think folks were really more focused on their policies and like what they thought they could bring to the table. And now in the last week of this campaign, we're really seeing the gloves come off.
Do you think endorsements are important in this particular race? Because Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, is expected to come to the city on Friday to support State Representative Chris Rabb. The powerful labor unions are supporting State Senator Sharif Street, and Dr. Ayla Stanford has backing and support from several political leaders, like the person currently in the seat, Congressman Evans.
Yeah, I think endorsements are very important for 3 specific reasons. They come with sort of 3 benefits. Not every endorsement comes with all of the benefits, but they generally fit one of these 3 boxes. Number 1, endorsements come with resources, right? So money. So getting the labor endorsement is huge because most of the labor unions have political action committees. So they will be spending money and giving you resources. 2, they're an important shortcut, right? When I say validator, what I really mean is like, it's almost kind of like a shortcut as to like, hey, this is who this person is. So for instance, Chris Rabb getting the endorsement of AOC is a major signal to the progressive community that, okay, this is the progressive guy in the race. And then the third thing that I think they're important for is just sort of boots on the ground. So if you get endorsed by an organization that is very volunteer driven, that's super helpful for GOTV weekend, get out the vote weekend, where people are knocking on doors. We follow politics very closely on this show, but I think for like the vast majority of people, it's just sort of like, oh, wait, election days on Tuesday. And there's not a huge window where they're necessarily thinking about things. It's like, oh, I have to pick a candidate in the next couple of days. And so having those folks roaming through neighborhoods, knocking on doors, handing out literature, answering questions, making their case, you would be surprised how many people are swayed because they say they look at it as like, oh, this candidate's cared enough to send somebody to my neighborhood, right? Like that does resonate with people. So as I said, the big three are money, volunteers, boots on the ground, and just validation are the three reasons why endorsements are so important.
I mean, you did hit on some of the controversies a little bit earlier. Let's talk about that. A lot of the candidates are bringing baggage. What have been some of the controversies in this race?
I think the two biggest controversies we've seen are related to Representative Raab's comments on the situation in Gaza and Dr. Stanford's response to that. There's been a lot of back and forth, and that has sort of become like I don't think it's necessarily unique to this race. I think it's something that you're seeing kind of across the board in Democratic primaries. People's positions about supporting Israel has become, where it might have been in the background in previous years, has become a focal point of conversation. And then the thing that is always fair game is your voting record, right? And Representative Raab has taken some votes which are seen as controversial amongst the Democratic Party. Most recently, he voted against a bill related to protecting victims of human trafficking. And Representative Raab has stated, like, look, I am unapologetically supportive of victims of human trafficking. However, this bill was not the right way to protect them. And so, I think some people will try to use that as a gotcha moment for him, saying like, oh, he's pro trafficking. And what I think Representative Raab has said is like, look, I'm very nuanced when I look at legislation, and I really try to understand the issue. And, I didn't think this bill was going to have its intended effect, and it was going to have some unintended consequences that I don't want to see happen. So I voted no on it.
And these candidates, especially there were more candidates early on in this race, and there were so many forums, like many groups in the city held a forum, and there was a debate. Do you get a sense that like voters are engaged in this race, or are they energized, or are they kind of experiencing fatigue, or simply could care less?
No, I do think folks are very energized. I think the national political climate right now, I think people cannot wait to get into the voting booth and express their feelings about the current direction of this nation. As you noted earlier, there are no Republican candidates, so the Democratic primary, for all intents and purposes, is the election. So I think it's folks are being asked to sort of choose the direction that they want to see our leadership take this country. And I think you have three sort of basic options. You have the political outsider, who is, the policy person of Dr. Stanford, who's never worked in politics before. You have the ultimate party insider of Senator Sharif Street, who was, chaired the state Democratic committee, who's been a longtime public servant representative. And then you have Representative Raab, who's positioning himself as like, I'm the progressive. I'm not the institutional candidate. I've been in politics, but I've always been on the outside of, the standard party lines. And so folks are really given sort of an option, a menu of how they want to proceed. And I should mention there is a fourth candidate.
I was just going to say that those are the top runners.
Those are the top three. There are four candidates. We have another political outsider from South Philadelphia,
Sean Griffith,
who he's running, basically saying like, I'm a breath of fresh air, so you do have different options in terms of the direction that you want your Congress to look like.
All right, we're going to talk more about what's on our primary ballot after this break. Everything feels more expensive right now, but one of Philly's best resources is still completely free. With a free Library of Philadelphia card, you get access to thousands of programs, events, and digital resources for all ages. Whether you're looking for something fun to do, hoping to build new skills, or simply want a welcoming place to spend time, the library is here for you. Your library card also opens the doors to a vast digital collection, including ebooks, audiobooks, learning languages, genealogy, and news. At its core, the library is where access meets opportunity. It's a place to explore new interests, gain practical skills, and connect with your community. And don't worry, they don't have those fees if you return your materials late. And anyone who lives, studies, or works in Philadelphia, or is a Pennsylvania resident, can get a library card. Sign up today, freelibrary.org/card, and see what's waiting for you. On the ballot, you'll be asked to vote for governor, but Democrat Josh Shapiro and Republican Stacey Garrity don't have any challengers in their primaries. So let's move on and look at the state legislature. Most candidates in the primary are running unopposed, but I want to talk about some of the districts that are competitive. Let's start in the 200th district. And this would be the person who would be filling in the seat of State Representative Chris Rabb. This is like Mount Airy, Chestnut Hill area.
Yeah, so an open seat usually means a flood of candidates running. We have 3 candidates that have made the ballot for the Democratic primary. Nobody on the Republican side has filed. Once people get elected, they tend to like to stay in office. So open seats do not happen too frequently. And so we have 3 candidates, DeShonda Williams, Chris Johnson, and Kasim Rashad, all vying to take over for State Rep Rabb.
Let's go over to Brewerytown Strawberry Mansion in District 195. Currently, Keith Harris is the representative, but there's 2 other candidates challenging him.
Yeah, so as I noted, you don't often see incumbents face a lot of challengers. People tend to like to stay in their seats. But in this case, Keith Harris is relatively new to the position. He took over as state rep in the 195th in 2024 after that seat was vacated by former state representative Donna Bullock, who left to go carry on the important work of Project Home. So as a relative newcomer to the General Assembly, Keith is facing 2 challengers, Kenneth Walker Jr. and Sierra McNeil. Sierra has gained a lot of momentum recently. She's supported by the Working Families Party. She's received endorsements from some of the more progressive organizations. So he absolutely has a real battle on his hands. Keith has spent years in public service, first as a council sergeant at arms, and also just working in his community as an advocate and as ward leader. So he certainly has the resources and the party support. So this should be an interesting race to watch.
Okay, let's go over to West Philly, District 192. This is currently represented by Morgan Cephas, but she has a challenger as well.
I think when folks, it's not a bad play to challenge somebody who was formerly, if folks recall, Morgan had declared for the 3rd Congressional District. So she was running both as a congressional candidate and as a state representative. So not a bad bet to make to challenge somebody who was seeking higher office. But now with Morgan's focus, back on her General Assembly seat, I think it's going to prove it's going to be a tough battle to unseat her. And interestingly enough, this is one of the few seats that does have a Republican candidate as well. So whoever wins the primary will have to face off against Tiffany Van Brown in November.
That's good information to know. And let's go over to the state Senate, where senators serve 4-year terms. But in this primary, there's 2 competitive races against a couple of long-term senators. Let's start with the 4th district between Art Haywood and Mike Cogbill.
The Senate in Pennsylvania is made up of 50 seats. As Trinae mentioned, they are 4-year terms, and half of the seats are up every 2 years. So even districts are up this year. In 2 years, all the odd districts will be up.
How do you keep all these rules in your head?
It's a messy place in my head. You don't want to know. You don't want to be in there. Trust me. It's I'm great at Quizzo though.
Good.
So, yeah, so you have longtime Senator Art Haywood, who is facing a challenger from Mike Cogbill of Philadelphia. And then just quickly, in the 8th District, you have longtime Senator Anthony Hardy Williams facing a challenger, David Goldsmith Jr. out of Delaware County. Both Senator Williams and Senator Haywood have the advantage of incumbency and name recognition. I encourage folks to do their research about, all of the challengers. There's a lot of great resources out there. The Committee of 70 can help you build a voter guide, Votes PA. It feels like in Philadelphia, oftentimes it's rare to have a choice in the primary. So I really do encourage folks to make sure that they educate themselves before they step in the voting booth.
And part of the education would also have to go with some of the ballot questions that we're going to be voting on. Newsletter editor Sian Cologne, she did a whole article for the newsletter about the ballot questions. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. But question 1 is about the creation of a Philadelphia Retirement Savings Board. What is this, Lauren?
Yeah, this is actually very cool. So this is a policy that's been championed by Council President Kenyatta Johnson. And essentially what it's trying to do is create a alternative retirement system for private sector employees who might not have access to employer provided retirement options, right? So instead of like doing their own like 401k or IRA, the city would set up essentially a retirement fund that would be, they'd automatically be enrolled in. And this retirement board that the charter question is asking about would be the board that kind of manages these funds to make sure that like the money is being invested properly and folks are being paid and things like that. So it's part of like a larger policy initiative to try to ensure that that folks who might not otherwise have access to like a structured retirement fund have that availability.
And the second question is about the creation of the Office of the Youth Ombudsperson. Why are we still using that word?
I hate that word so much today.
Oh my gosh.
Because it's like, it summarizes what they do. So the Youth Ombudsperson, I'm going to call them the YO from now on, so I don't have to pronounce that word anymore. So essentially what the city council is looking to do is create a position that can help like advise and essentially serve as like the policy guide and advisor regarding issues related to like youth in Philadelphia. So it's a charter. The reason it's a charter question is like, look, this is something that the mayor could create if the mayor wanted to create this, create an office or staff this position. But by putting it in the charter, it ensures sort of two things. Number one, that the position is permanent. And number two, that there's a minimum level of funding to support the roles, responsibilities, and duties of the position. So that's what that charter change is about.
And there was a third question about elected officials being allowed to keep a current position while running for another position. But that question actually was pulled from the ballot a few months back. What happened there?
Yeah, so this was one of the many attempts to modify the city's resign to run rule. So the charter contains a provision that says if you are either an elected official in the city or even an employee of the city, you must resign your position before seeking office. And the only exception is if you're an elected official running for re-election. Now, Philadelphia, we're not the only city to have what's known as a resign to run rule, but ours is one of the most restrictive in the country, right? There's no exceptions. You seeking office, you have to quit your job. So over the years, council has tried to amend this rule numerous times, and it's one of the few ballot measures that Philadelphians consistently vote down. So Councilmember Thomas, this past year, decided to take another crack at resign to run. And instead of trying to just completely abandon it, his proposal would have allowed folks to not have to resign if they were seeking federal or state office. So where people are probably familiar with this rule in place is, anytime there's an open mayor's seat, all of a sudden it feels like half of city council resigns in order to go run for mayor, which is what we saw this last cycle, I believe. Yeah. 7 of the 17 council members quit to go throw their hats in the ring for mayor.
I remember I was in his office and I talked to him about this proposal or this idea. And he said, we're losing a lot of like institutional knowledge from folks that were on council because of this rule.
Yeah, and I completely agree that, we do lose institutional knowledge through the resign to run rule, but we're also a body that doesn't have term limits, right? There are council members who are serving that have been serving longer than I have been alive, right? I think 40 plus years, at 45 plus years at this point. So sometimes it's council turnover doesn't really happen unless there is, either resign to run. So, some people argue that like it's not a bad thing because it does allow, you lose institutional knowledge, but you get fresh energy and fresh ideas. So it's sort of a trade-off there. So this got pulled. Voters were originally supposed to vote on this, but Councilmember Thomas, after the charter resolutions passed council, said that he heard feedback from the public that they were not supportive of it. And so he said, you know what, we're going to go back to the drawing board. We're going to figure something out that everybody's happy with. I think council could successfully eliminate resign to run, but I think it's going to be hard to do it absent tying it to term limits. I think voters will be willing to waive the resign to run requirement if council enacts term limits. Whether that happens, it remains to be seen.
Very interesting. All right, Lauren Vitas, political contributor for CityCast Philly. Thanks so much for explaining Philly and PA politics.
Always a pleasure.
There's a voter's guide in today's newsletter. There's a link in the show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about the last minute voter's guide, share this episode with a friend so they can get caught up before Tuesday's primary. Also, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.